The moment the most powerful man in the room, my son's new billionaire boss, wrapped his arms around me in a warm, familiar hug and called me by my first name. The look of pure, uncomprehending, and soul-shattering terror on my son's face was the most satisfying and the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Elizabeth. My name is Elizabeth Sterling. I am 79 years old, and for the past 2 years, my home has been here, in a quiet apartment in the sky. Though for 50 years before that, my life, my home, my entire world was a beautiful, rambling old house in a quiet, leafy suburb. This story, my goodness, this is a story about a party. A single, glittering, and ultimately a catastrophic party. It is a secret I've held in my heart like a winning lottery ticket. A secret that even my own son, my dear, ambitious son, did not fully understand until the very moment it was cashed in, right in front of his horrified eyes. He knows his career and his marriage imploded that night. He does not know that I, his quiet, invisible mother, was the one who lit the fuse. There is a particular kind of humiliation, you see, that is reserved for the parent of a successful child. It is the humiliation of being edited, of having your own, quiet, and often difficult life, deemed not quite good enough for the new, shiny, and important world your child now inhabits. You are a piece of their past. They are gently, lovingly, and with the most exquisite, smiling politeness, trying to hide. The shame of it is a quiet, creeping poison. You begin to see yourself through their eyes. You see your simple, comfortable home, your old, unfashionable clothes, your life of quiet, unnewsworthy dignity, as a liability. You start to believe their narrative, that you are a sweet but slightly embarrassing secret to be kept. But I am telling my story now because I am done with being a secret. I am done with the shame. I have learned that a person's worth is not determined by the job title of their child, but by the quiet, steady, and often unseen value of their own long life. And I am telling it for anyone out there who has ever been made to feel like a rough draft in the beautifully edited, final version of their own family's story. Before I begin this difficult, and I must admit, rather delicious story, I would be so very grateful for your kindness. My heart still beats a little fast when I think of that night. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support, your presence, it is a great comfort. It gives this old woman the strength to finally step back into that glittering, terrible, and ultimately triumphant room and tell you the whole, unvarnished truth. Thank you, my dears. My story, the real story, began not with wealth, but with a promise. We met in college. My late husband, my dear Arthur, was the kindest, most brilliant, and most wonderfully decent man I have ever known. He was a professor of literature. He was a man who lived in a world of beautiful, powerful ideas. He believed in the quiet, transformative power of a good education, of a life of the mind. I was a nurse, cardiac care nurse. My world was one of science, of precision, of the quiet, steady, and deeply practical work of healing broken hearts. We were a strange and beautiful pair, the poet and the pragmatist. Our life together was a long and wonderful conversation, a partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and a deep and abiding and quiet love. We built our world together in a simple, sturdy, 2-story house in a quiet, leafy suburb. It was not a grand house. It was a sanctuary, a fortress of quiet, middle-class contentment. And while Arthur filled it with books and music and ideas, I filled it with a sense of order, of safety, of a deep and unshakable calm. And I, the pragmatist, was the one who managed our small but secure financial world. Arthur was a genius, but he was a genius who could never for the life of him remember to balance a checkbook. He lived in a world of ideas, not of numbers. So, I became the family's chief financial officer. "I am a fool with money, my love," he would always say with a self-deprecating, an utterly charming smile. Without you, I would be a brilliant and completely bankrupt man. He was not a man who ever felt threatened by a competent woman. He was a man who cherished it. He taught me, through our long life together, that a true partnership is not about one person being the star. It is about two people, quietly and with a deep and abiding love, helping each other to shine. We had one child, our son, our Michael. Oh, he was the joy of our lives. A beautiful, bright, and deeply loving boy. He inherited his father's brilliant mind and my practical, no-nonsense nature. He was a perfect, and sometimes a terrifying, combination of us both. He was a boy who was not a dreamer. He was a planner, an achiever. From the moment he was born, he was a boy who was in a hurry to conquer the world. We were so proud of him. We gave him everything. We were not wealthy people, but we poured every spare penny, every ounce of our energy, into his education, into his future. He went to the best schools. He got the best grades. He was a star. And then, 10 years ago, he married a woman who was just like him. Her name was Chloe, and she was a masterpiece. She was a corporate lawyer from a wealthy family in the city. She was beautiful, she was brilliant, and she was consumed by an ambition so raw, so powerful, it was almost a physical presence. They were not just a couple. They were a merger. A powerful, new, and unstoppable entity. From the very first moment, I felt a chill. She was not unkind to me. She was a model of polite, respectful, and utterly dismissive perfection. She looked at our simple, comfortable, suburban life, the life my Arthur and I had so carefully and so lovingly built, and she saw a failure, a lack of ambition, a quaint and slightly embarrassing starting point from which her brilliant, successful husband had so fortunately, and with her help, escaped. She was the master of the subtle, smiling insult. She would walk into my clean, comfortable kitchen, and she would say, "Oh, Elizabeth, I just love these old, original cabinets. They have such a charming, rustic authenticity." She was not admiring my home. She was turning it into a museum of a past her husband had transcended. And my son, my Michael, so in love with her, so in love with the new, shiny, and powerful world she represented, was completely and utterly blind. He saw her condescension as sophistication. He saw her dismissiveness as a sign of her high standards. "Oh, Mom," he would say to me with a small, embarrassed laugh, "you just have to understand Chloe. She's used to the best. She's a perfectionist." He was not just explaining her to me. He was apologizing for me, for my simple middle class, and in her eyes, deeply imperfect, life. And in that apology, I felt the first, terrible, and heartbreaking tremor of my own, impending erasure. I was no longer the proud, capable mother who had raised a brilliant son. I was the embarrassing, rustic mother that his brilliant wife now had to graciously, and with a great deal of patient sighing, endure. The years that followed were a long, slow, and deeply painful education in the art of becoming a secret. My son and his brilliant, ambitious wife were on a rocket ship to the moon. They were a golden couple, the darlings of the city's business pages. He was a rising star at a prestigious investment firm, a rainmaker. She was on the verge of making partner at her law firm. They bought a magnificent and breathtakingly expensive loft in a trendy downtown neighborhood. Their life was a glittering whirlwind of important dinner parties, of charity galas, of weekend trips to the Hamptons. And my life, my quiet, suburban life, it did not fit into their new, beautiful, and exquisitely curated narrative. I was a loose thread, a sentimental, slightly embarrassing piece of their past that they did not know how to weave into the sleek, modern fabric of their new life. After my dear Arthur passed away 5 years ago, the distance became a chasm. My grief was a messy, inconvenient, and deeply unglamorous thing, and it was a thing they simply did not have time for. They were, of course, wonderful. They were models of efficient, modern sympathy. Chloe organized the most beautiful, tasteful, and completely impersonal funeral I have ever attended. It was a perfect corporate-style memorial for a man she had never, not for a second, truly understood. In the lonely months that followed, the phone calls from my son became less frequent, more rushed. He was always so busy, so important. "Hi, Mom," he would say, his voice a quick, efficient staccato. "Just wanted to check in. Is everything okay? The trust is still performing well, right? Chloe is keeping an eye on it for you." He did not ask how I was. He asked how my trust fund was. He was not checking in on his mother. He was checking in on an asset. His father, the gentle literature professor, was gone. And in his place was a man who spoke the language of his wife, the language of the bottom line. The final and most profound transformation of our relationship, the moment I went from being his mother to being his secret, came when my first grandchild, a beautiful little girl named Lily, was born. My heart, which had been so heavy with grief, soared with a new and desperate love. A grandchild. A chance, I thought, to rebuild the bridge between our two worlds. A chance for me to be a grandmother. But Catherine had a different plan. "We've hired a nanny, of course," she'd announced to me a week after Lily was born. "A wonderful woman. She's a developmental psychologist, and she speaks fluent Mandarin. It is so important for a child's cognitive development to be exposed to a second language at an early age." I, of course, did not speak fluent Mandarin. I spoke only the simple, universal, and in her eyes, completely valueless, language of a grandmother's love. My role in my own granddaughter's life was to be a carefully managed and carefully limited one. I was not to be a caregiver. I was to be a visitor. A quaint and slightly unpredictable visitor who had to be scheduled and managed and carefully supervised. And then, about 3 years ago, the final and most humiliating demotion occurred. Michael and Chloe bought a new house. A magnificent, sprawling, and breathtakingly expensive, modern home in the most exclusive suburb in the state. It was a house designed not for a family, but for a magazine cover. It was a statement, a testament to their arrival, and they needed help. "Mom," my son began, and he had the grace to look slightly ashamed. He sat across from me on a sofa that was beautiful, white, and as hard as a block of marble. "Chloe and we have a proposition for you, a favor to ask." Chloe took over, her voice a smooth, elegant, and utterly shameless melody of loving concern. "Elizabeth, my love," she began. "As you know, our lives are just insane. Michael is working around the clock. I am on the verge of making partner. And with the new house and Lily and all of our social obligations, we are drowning. We need a full-time, live-in housekeeper and nanny, someone we can trust implicitly, someone who can manage this big, beautiful house and be here for Lily when we can't." "Yes?" She paused, and she looked at me, her beautiful, intelligent eyes full of a deep and utterly false sincerity. "And then we thought of you," she said, her voice a soft, gentle whisper, pure, unadulterated manipulation. I just stared at her. I could not believe what I was hearing. "You are all alone in that big old house," she continued. "You are lonely. We know you are. And you are so wonderful at all of this, at managing a home, at creating a sense of order. And you are so good with Lily." She leaned forward. "We would pay you, of course, a generous salary, and you would have your own beautiful private suite of rooms in the new house. You would be here with your family, with your granddaughter. It is the perfect solution for all of us." It was not a proposition. It was a job offer. They were not asking me to be a grandmother. They were asking me to be the help. I looked at my son. I looked at his handsome, successful, and suddenly so very small face. And I saw the pleading in his eyes. "Please, Mom. Please say yes. Please make my life easier. Please solve this problem for me." Mindu. And I, a woman who had spent her entire life solving problems for the men she loved, I heard myself say the word that would be the beginning of the end. Yes, I said. So I sold my house. The house my Arthur and I had built, the house that was filled with 50 years of our life together. I packed away my memories, and I moved into a beautiful, sterile, and lonely guest suite in the back of my son's magnificent new house. I was no longer a mother, or a widow, or an independent woman. I was a salaried employee in the home of my own child. The first time it happened was at a small, intimate dinner party they were hosting for some of Michael's colleagues. I had been in the kitchen all day, preparing the meal. I was the one who had cooked the food, who had set the beautiful table. As the guests were arriving, I was in the dining room, lighting the candles. One of the guests, a man I did not know, walked in and smiled at me. "The house is just beautiful," he said. "And you must be Michael's mother. He's told me so much about you." And before I could answer, my son walked in. He put his arm around the man's shoulder, and he laughed his easy, charming laugh. "Oh, no," he'd said with a wave of his hand in my direction. "This is Elizabeth. She is an absolute godsend. She is just our housekeeper." And then he had turned, and he had led the man away, leaving me standing alone in the beautiful candle-lit dining room, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest. Just our housekeeper. And when? The lie was so casual, so easy, so utterly and completely devastating. It was the moment I realized that I was not just their employee. I was their secret, their embarrassing, middle-class, and deeply uncurated secret. And that, I knew, was a secret that I could no longer afford to keep. The 2 years that followed were a masterclass in the art of the public smile and the private, silent scream. I was a prisoner in a beautiful gilded cage, a cage of my own making. I had agreed to their terms. I had accepted my new role, and I played it to perfection. On the surface, my life was comfortable. I had a beautiful suite of rooms. I was paid a generous salary, a salary that was, of course, drawn from my own vast and completely unacknowledged trust fund. And I was with my granddaughter, my beautiful, sweet Lily, every single day. That was the one, true, and uncomplicated joy in my new and deeply complicated life. But my relationship with my own son and his wife was a masterpiece of quiet, soul-crushing cruelty. They were not unkind to me in private. In private, I was still Mother and Elizabeth. But in public, in front of their new important friends, I was nothing. I was a ghost. A polite, efficient, and completely invisible presence. The lie, the one my son had told that first night, the one that had shattered my heart into a million pieces, became their official story. I was not his mother. I was Elizabeth, their wonderful, devoted, and life-saving housekeeper. It was a brilliant and a deeply sick kind of logic. In their world, a world of nannies and chefs and personal assistants, a live-in aging mother was a strange and slightly pathetic complication. But a devoted, long-term, and utterly discreet housekeeper? That was a status symbol. They had not just erased me. They had rebranded me. They had turned their own inconvenient mother into a luxury accessory. The pain of it, my goodness, the pain of it was a constant, dull, and throbbing ache in my heart. Every time my own son would look right through me, every time one of their friends would hand me an empty glass without a word of thanks, every time my own granddaughter would be praised for being so well behaved for the nanny, it was another small, sharp, and exquisitely painful little death. And my son was a willing, and I must say, a brilliant accomplice. He played his part to perfection. He was so kind, so grateful, so full of a deep and utterly false appreciation for the wonderful Elizabeth. He was a man who had become so consumed by the beautiful, perfect, and utterly fraudulent story of his new life that he had become a stranger to his own heart and to his own history. The final, brutal, and soul-shattering breaking point came as I knew it one day would, at a party. It was not just any party. It was the party of the year. It was a grand, glittering affair at their home, in honor of my son's new boss. The new CEO of his company was a legend, a man named Arthur Vance. He was a reclusive and almost mythically powerful tech billionaire who had just acquired the old conservative investment firm where my son worked. He was a man known for his brilliance, his ruthlessness, and his deep and abiding contempt for the kind of lazy, entitled, old money world that my son and his wife so desperately and so successfully aspired to. The entire evening was a performance of pure, unadulterated terror. My son and his wife were like two beautiful, terrified swans, gliding gracefully across the surface of a lake while paddling frantically, desperately underneath. Their entire future, the future of their beautiful, perfect, and deeply indebted life, depended on this one single, perfect evening. I, of course, was the head of the domestic staff. I had managed the caterers. I had arranged the flowers. I had ensured that every single solitary detail of the evening was a testament to my son and daughter-in-law's perfect, effortless taste. I was the invisible architect of their greatest and most important social triumph. And then he arrived. Mr. Vance was not what I had expected. He was not a flashy, young, tech bro billionaire. He was a man in his late 60s, with a quiet, unassuming presence, and a pair of the most intelligent and deeply, deeply tired eyes I had ever seen. He moved through the party with a quiet, watchful grace, a man who was clearly not enjoying himself, but who was missing nothing. My son and Chloe were a symphony of sycophantic charm. They laughed at his jokes. They praised his genius. They were two beautiful, glittering moths, fluttering desperately around a quiet and very old flame. The moment, the one that would change everything, came late in the evening. I was in the drawing room, quietly refilling the champagne flutes on a silver tray. Mr. Vance was standing by the fireplace, alone for a moment, looking at a small, unassuming painting that hung on the wall. It was the one painting in the entire soulless house that was mine. A small, beautiful watercolor of a quiet suburban garden, a painting my own dear Arthur, my husband, had painted for me on our 10th anniversary. Mr. Vance was looking at my husband's painting. And then, my son and Chloe, in their final, brilliant, and utterly catastrophic act of social climbing, they made their move. They walked over to him, their faces alight with perfect, smiling, and deeply ambitious charm. "Mr. Vance," my son began, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "I am so glad you are enjoying the art. It is a passion of ours." "It is a beautiful piece," Mr. Vance said, his voice a quiet, gravelly rumble. "It has a great deal of heart, a quality that is so rare these days." And then Chloe, my brilliant, beautiful, and breathtakingly foolish daughter-in-law, she delivered the killing blow. She looked over at me, standing there with my tray of champagne, a quiet, invisible, and perfectly costumed servant. And she smiled, a small, magnanimous, and utterly dismissive smile. "Our housekeeper Elizabeth is a great admirer of that piece as well," she said, her voice a melody of pure, condescending grace. "She is a woman of simple tastes, but good ones." And then my son, my own son, my beautiful, ambitious, and utterly, completely, and finally lost son. He looked at me, and he looked at the most powerful man in his universe, and he said the words, the final, unforgivable, and soul-destroying words. "She's just our housekeeper, sir," he said, with a small, apologetic, and deeply, deeply ashamed little laugh. "A wonderful woman, but just our housekeeper." The silence that followed was a universe. I stood there, with the heavy silver tray in my hands, and I looked at my son. And in his eyes, I saw the full and terrible and tragic scope of his own personal and spiritual bankruptcy. And then, something happened that no one, least of all me, could have ever expected. Mr. Vance, the reclusive, powerful, and terrifying billionaire, he turned from the painting. He looked at my son, and he looked at Chloe. And then he looked at me. And his tired, intelligent, and deeply world-weary face, it broke into a smile. A smile so wide, so warm, so genuine, and so full of a deep and abiding, and 20-year-old affection, that it lit up the entire silent and suddenly very, very cold room. He took a step towards me. He took the heavy silver tray from my trembling hands, and he placed it on a nearby table. And then he wrapped his arms around me, in a hug that was so full of a shared and secret and deeply profound history that it felt like coming home. "Lizzie," he boomed, and his voice was a deep and joyous and utterly, completely, and devastatingly familiar laugh. "My God, I haven't seen you in 20 years. You haven't aged a day." And as my son and his wife stared, their faces a grotesque mask of pure, uncomprehending, and soul-shattering terror, he turned to them. "Michael," he said, and his voice was no longer warm. It was a blade of ice. "I believe you have just introduced me to your mother, my old college roommate, and the woman who, with a $2,000 check from her own meager nurse's salary, gave me the seed money to start my very first company." I let the silence stretch. I let them all sit in that thick, terrible, and beautifully clarifying quiet. I looked at my husband, my David, and for the first time in 50 years, I saw him as a stranger. A handsome, charming, and utterly hollow man. A king who had built his entire kingdom on a foundation of borrowed strength and stolen valor. And then I looked at my son, my dear, gentle Robert, and I saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of a lifetime of carefully constructed lies being shattered all at once. And my heart, my real mother's heart, ached for him. And then I looked at her, Anna.D., the beautiful, fiery, and completely clueless upgrade, and I felt a strange and terrible pity for her. She was not a predator. She was a pawn, a beautiful, glittering, and ultimately a disposable pawn in a game she never even knew she was playing. And finally, I looked at the man who was the true king in the room, Arthur Vance, my old friend, my secret. He looked at me, and in his tired, wise eyes, I saw not pity, but a deep and abiding and fiercely loyal respect. He was the one who finally broke the silence. He did not shout. He did not rage. His voice was a quiet, disappointed, and utterly final rumble. He looked at my son, Michael, and he said, "Son, you and I are going to have a very, very long talk in the morning." And then he looked at me. "Lizzie," he said, his voice now full of a gentle, old warmth. "It is good to see you. You look well." And then he turned, and with a quiet, dismissive nod to the stunned and silent room, he walked away. The king had left the building. I stood up. I did not need to say another word. My work was done. "Robert," I said to my son, "I believe it is time for us to go." I walked out of that restaurant, my son at my side. I did not look back at the beautiful shattered ruins of my husband's life. I did not need to. I had already moved on. The aftermath was quiet, and it was absolute. There was no messy, public divorce. There was no ugly, corporate battle. There was just a quiet, swift, and brutally efficient execution. David, faced with the undeniable, two-fronted war of his own professional ruin and the loss of his new, dynastic prize, did not fight. He had no fight left in him. He signed the papers. He took the generous but finite alimony I had offered him. He lost the company that had been his identity, his life's work, the very engine of his magnificent ego. Sterling Lighting was, and is, now mine. Anna, the beautiful, fiery, and ultimately foolish upgrade, she did not stay. Of course, she didn't. A deposed king, with a shattered fortune and a broken spirit, was not the man she had fallen in love with. The dynasty she had so cleverly married into had turned out to be a mirage. She left him within the month. Her father, the reclusive tech billionaire, my secret business partner, was not pleased. I am told her financial future is not as bright as she had once imagined it would be. My son, my dear, gentle Robert, is healing. The truth of his father's character and of his mother's long, secret, and quiet strength has been a difficult, but ultimately a liberating, education for him. He is the chairman of the charitable foundation I've established in his grandfather's name, a foundation funded by the profits of the company he and I now run together. We are a team again, a different kind of team, a quieter, more honest one. And David, my husband of 50 years, he lives in the beautiful house we once shared, alone, a king in an empty castle, haunted by the ghost of the foundation he never saw, and the quiet, boring architect who had, in the end, proven to be the true master of the game. I learned the hardest lesson a woman can learn, that a life, a true and equal partnership, is a delicate and complex piece of architecture. And if one person is allowed to take all the credit for its beautiful facade, they will eventually forget about the quiet, unseen, and absolutely essential foundation. And a house without a foundation, no matter how beautiful, will, in the end, inevitably, come crashing down. He did not mean to be cruel. He just forgot. He forgot the girl in the cramped kitchen. He forgot the woman who had written his first business plan. He forgot that his empire was built not on a single, heroic pillar, but on two. And his final, terrible betrayal was not just an act of infidelity. It was an act of profound, and in the end, catastrophic amnesia. All. So, if you are out there, and you feel that you are the invisible foundation in someone else's grand life, please, remember this old woman. Do not wait 50 years. Do not wait for them to forget you. Quietly, methodically, and with all the strength you possess, remind them that you are there. Remind them that without you, their entire beautiful world would turn to dust. Thank you for letting me share this very strategic story with you. It is a good reminder, I think, that it is never too late to become the architect of your own, new, and beautiful life. If you have found strength in this tale, please, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on that little notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. And in the comments below, I would love for you to share a story about a time you rediscovered your own essential and foundational strength. Love you all. This is Grandma Elizabeth, and I'll see you in the next story.